Hello and good afternoon to everyone joining us virtually from across the hemisphere and around the world for this timely and important conversation on Colombia's monetary policy trajectory with Dr. Leonardo Villar, Governor of the Central Bank of Colombia. I'm Jason Marzek, Vice President, Senior Director here at the Atlantic Council, our Adrian Arch Latin America Center. Dr. Villar is one of the region's most respected economic thinkers and a leading voice on monetary policy at a time of both opportunity and uncertainty for Colombia and the broader region. And Governor, thank you so much for being with us today. Dr. Villar has served as governor of Banco de República since January 2021. He brings decades of experience across international institutions, academia, and the public service. He also previously represented Spain, Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, and Central America at the IMF. He led the Colombian think tank, Fed de Desarrollo, which is a partner of the Atlantic Council, and has also held senior roles at CAF Development Bank of Latin America. In Colombia, he's also served on the central bank's board for 12 years and has held key positions in the Ministry of Finance. I'd also like to thank the World Bank and the International Finance Corporation for their continued support, which made this event possible, a reflection of the continuation of the work that we do together on the margins of the spring meetings earlier this year and in previous years. As we'll discuss today, this conversation comes at a critical juncture. Colombia has long been recognized as a standout performer in Latin America with strong macroeconomic institutions and a commitment to long-term stability. But like many countries, it now faces a complex global and domestic landscape, inflationary pressures, fiscal challenges, currency volatility, and questions around how best to attract and sustain foreign investment. Today's conversation is not only an opportunity to hear directly from Governor Villar on how the central bank is navigating these challenges, but also understand how Colombia is positioning itself for the future, to strengthen public trust, ensure monetary credibility, and foster a more resilient economy. At the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arch Latin America, we have long viewed Colombia as a cornerstone of regional stability and growth. This is why we built enduring partnerships in the country and have convened various stakeholders from Bogota to Washington to help chart a path towards shared prosperity and security. Today's conversation will be moderated by Christy Palekia, who is a member of our America's Economic Security Group and also of our U.S. Colombia Advisor Group. She spent most of her career in banking, is a founder and principal of Palekia International, which is a financial and strategic advisor group, and among her previous roles, led the Western Hemisphere portfolio for the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. Again, welcome to you, Dr. Villar. Christy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jason. Governor, it's an honor to be speaking with you today. We all recognize the critical and important role that the central bank plays. We thank you for your service, and we admire your career as a well-respected economist. So many of us have watched Colombia's remarkable journey from the chaos of the late 90s to being one of the few countries in Latin America that has investment grade ratings and OECD status. Over the last few years, Colombian foreign direct investment has dropped significantly. In April, the IMF decided to suspend Colombia's $9.8 billion line of credit over fiscal concerns. And just last week, Moody's, the only agency holding on to investment grade, downgraded Colombia to Baa3, one notch above high yield. What steps can the central bank take to get the country back on track and attract international investors?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be with you. It's a great honor for me to be with the Atlantic Council, and in particular with you, Christy and Jason. On your question, it is, you describe a large part of the problems we have now. It is, we indeed have lost the investment grade in the last few years. And very recently, we were again downgraded by Moody's and by Standard & Poor's. Also, since April, we have suspended the access to the FCL of the IMF, which was not just a source of financing, which is important, but is not the main purpose of that line, but a qualification of Colombia as a country with a very strong policy framework.
Mhm.
So the fact that we have lost that access and we have been downgraded by several uh, um, um, by Standard and Poor's and by Moody's is a difficulty that Colombia is facing and creates big challenges. Now, on the specific reference to foreign investment in Colombia, I would say that paradoxically, we keep a very high level of FDI in Colombia. FDI Colombia is still around 11, 12 billion dollars a year, which is very high even for our own historical standards. This is a figure that is well above what we had, say, in the first decade of this century. And we also are receiving important amounts of portfolio investment. We have a significant reduction in foreign investment in the oil and mining sector, partly because of bad incentives, which created by the government policies, but in the rest of the sectors, we keep important flow of foreign direct investment and of portfolio investment. The impact of the downgrades that we have received in the last few years, and in particular this year, is more reflected in the cost of the financing that we have. The cost of any credit that we get from abroad has gone up by a significant amount, even if the domestic interest rate of the central bank has gone down because inflation has gone down, and it has gone down by, say, more than 400 basis points in the last year and a half. The cost of financing for the government has gone up by more or less 1.5 or 2 percentage points. So the reflection of those downgrades is a steepening of the yield curve of Colombia, which creates problems for the cost of the government financing and also for the ability of the private sector to get financing from abroad. So far, we haven't seen a reduction in the flows, except in the area of in the sector of mining and oil.
Thank you for that.
Perhaps sorry, I will add that you asked also about the role of the central bank trying to combat this situation or to mitigate the impact of this. The role of the central bank is limited, as in any country. We just monetary policy, but there are many other policies that are not in our hands. But still, monetary policy is very, very important. And macroeconomic stability and inflation under control is key. So the role of the central bank trying to address the current situation is mainly in that front, keeping inflation low, and to the extent that we can keep inflation low, we may have to reduce interest rates. But the interest rates that we can reduce are the very short-term interest rates. And we have done so as inflation has gone down during the last year and a half. But we cannot control the cost of financing of the government or the long-term interest rates that affect the public and the private sector.
Thank you. And I mean, you mentioned this, but how do you, I guess you've faced a lot of inflationary pressures. You managed that. You mentioned that you're managing short-term rates. I guess how do you see interest rates in Colombia evolving in the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, the interest rates are relatively high in Colombia today. They are high in nominal terms. The policy interest rate is 9.25%, which is quite high. But it is also high in real terms. If you take the ex post real interest rate, which is measured as the difference between the policy interest rate minus inflation rate, which is at 5.1%, still what you have is a real interest rate, an ex post real interest rate of more than 4 percentage points, which is quite high. And by any standard, we consider that as a reflection of a contractionary monetary policy. Why do we have a contractionary monetary policy? Because even if inflation has been going down during the last 2 years, still we have an inflation rate which is well above our target. We have a inflation targeting regime, and we have a target of 3% inflation with a plus 1 percentage point or minus 1 percentage point range in which we are supposed to be. But we are above that range, and then we consider that we have to keep a relatively high real interest rate. As how do we foresee interest rates in the future? We hope we will be able to have lower interest rates, but that will depend very, very much on the ability to reduce inflation and to keep not only observe the inflation, but inflation expectations converging towards the target. We announced 6 months ago that we were expecting to have inflation within the target range this year in 2025. But several news and several surprises have affected the evolution of inflation. It is going down much more slowly than we were expecting. The increase in public in fiscal deficit has affected also the path of inflation, and that has forced us to keep interest rates that have gone down, but much less than they will have otherwise.
Thank you. And you mentioned the deficit. So I guess two questions related to that. Colombia recently suspended the La Ley de la Regla Fiscal, which limits government spending to keep the deficit and public debt under control. In addition, the DIAN, the National Directorate of Taxes and Customs, has been collecting fewer tax revenues over the last few years. So how can the central bank manage this to help to prevent the deficit from exacerbating and to keep the cost of debt under control?
Well, we are an autonomous central bank. That implies that we are part of the Colombian state, but not part of the government. We have autonomy to manage monetary policy, but the responsibility for fiscal policy is entirely on government's hands. What we try to do as far as we can is to work with the very strong technical teams that we have in the bank to advise the government, to educate public opinion in the direction of the importance of sound fiscal policies and sound macroeconomic policies in general. But besides that, what we can do is to manage monetary policy in order to achieve our constitutional mandate. And our constitutional mandate is essentially to keep nominal stability of the economy, inflation under control, and avoid additional problems that will come if inflation goes up and macroeconomic stability is lost. So in some sense, what we have to do is to work taking into account what is happening with the fiscal situation, uh, trying to recommend a sound policy, but taking what we have as a exogenous factor to monetary policy and to the decisions of the bank.
Thank you. While the Colombian peso has experienced periods of volatility in the past, Colombia has a history, as you actually point out in your remarks, of serious fiscal management, and that has helped to contribute to minimizing the volatility of the peso historically. How is the central bank, or what strategies does the central bank have to manage currency stability without compromising market confidence?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because what we have had during our history of many decades is many different exchange rate policies.
Mhm.
For a very long time in the 20th century, we tried to manage the exchange rate. Then we had the exchange rate bands, and the experience was not good. That was perhaps needed to make the transition from a policy of fixed interest rates towards flexibility. But what we feel today is that floating exchange rate is the best policy that we can have. That means that we allow the exchange rate to go up or down freely without any intervention of the bank. We keep an important amount of international reserves. We have an important amount. Right now, we have more or less $65 billion as international reserves, which is very significant amount for a country of the size of Colombia. But we don't intervene in the market. We just allow the exchange rate to float. That doesn't mean that we don't care about the exchange rate. The exchange rate can create inflationary pressures. So if it is depreciating too much, it may create inflationary pressures, and that may lead us to respond with the interest rate to make monetary policy more contractionary and to counterweight those pressures on inflation. Also, if the exchange rate is going down, as is happening very recently, I mean, if it is going towards appreciation of the peso, we say in Colombia, it is going down, but it's because the peso is going up, then we can more freely relax monetary policy. But of course, it's not the only variable that we have to take into account when we decide what to do with monetary policy and the interest rate. But in general, what we do is, with the exchange rate, allow the exchange rate to float, take into account what is happening with the exchange rate as a very important piece of information for our decisions on monetary policy. And the fact that we allow the exchange rate to float has created endogenously mechanisms in the private sector to deal with the volatility of the exchange rate. And paradoxically, the exchange rate has become relatively stable because there are derivatives and mechanisms to hedge against the risks in the exchange rate market that has helped the private sector and the government from those disturbances that can arise from the foreign exchange market. But the question is the answer, specific answer to your question is we don't intervene in the market. We don't try to manage the exchange rate directly.
Thank you. With so much uncertainty in the global economy, including US interest rate decisions and geopolitical tensions, how is Colombia preparing to mitigate potential external shocks?
Well, perhaps my answer to the previous question is very important for this one.
Exactly.
Because a very important mechanism to prepare to volatility, against volatility in the international markets is through a floating exchange rate. The exchange rate is the first line of defense against volatility and against shocks that the Colombian economy may receive. So the first answer is that. Of course, there is a limit to the volatility that we can accept. There are situations in which some intervention or important interventions are warranted. And for instance, during the COVID period, it was required to intervene in the market in some way to avoid too extreme volatility. If there is a very big shock, the type of shocks that we may have had in the past when the Venezuelan economy collapsed, and we were very much affected by that. That type of volatility may create conditions under which the central bank may have to intervene in the market. And for that purpose, we have a very large level of international reserves. As I mentioned, we have $65 billion, which is a very large amount. But the purpose in normal times, or relatively normal times, is to keep that as a caution and not to use it. It's just to show that we have that caution and to allow the exchange rate to act as the first line of defense.
Thank you. Central banks around the world are exploring digital currencies. I know that Colombia has a history of being a bit more conservative and maybe less technologically advanced in that respect. What is the Bank of Republic's position on a central bank digital currency? And how do you see fintech innovation aligning with those goals?
Well, fintech innovation is key for us. It's very important. We have devoted a lot of efforts to the development of a fast payment system in Colombia. We had several private initiatives in Colombia working, and there are several mechanisms for those fast payment systems, several platforms in which those fast payment systems were working, but they acted as closed gardens, what we call closed gardens, which is they acted for some specific banks or groups of banks. The purpose of the central bank has been to create an interoperable system in which all the banks in Colombia are interconnected to have fast payment system among all of them, and with clearing the transactions in the central bank. We are developing the system. We have been working with the financial system and with the fintechs during the last 2 or 3 years, and we are just about to start with the new system that we call Breve. Breve is what some people say is the Colombian PIX, the PIX making reference to the PIX of Brazil. The system will start working this month of July for registering the keys that each person in Colombia wants to have or required to have to work with the system. Many banks have already opened the system to register the keys, and they have already several or many millions of keys that are in the hands of the banks and will be introduced in our system very soon, starting by mid-July. But the transactions in the new system, in Breve, will start in September. So the program is working very well, and I think will be a success. And we have been working with all the financial system very closely and with the fintechs. Now, with regards to the CBDCs, we have been very skeptical about the usefulness of retail CBDCs. And perhaps I would say my own perception is that a retail means of payments, like a retail money, should be mainly issued by the private sector. The central bank is the lender of last resort of the financial system, is the issuer of base money, but the money that is in the hands of the population is accounts in the banks, and that is issued by the private sector. So I don't see many advantages in having a retail CBDC. But what we have concluded from the analysis in the Banco de la República has been that eventually a wholesale CBDC may be very useful for some types of transactions, especially for international transactions. If several countries have wholesale CBDCs and they have tokenized virtual money issued by the central banks, there will be more mechanisms to clear, to settle transactions internationally. And that may be very helpful. That is something in which the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, is working, and we are very optimistic about that process and the possibility of having at some point in the future a CBDC, a wholesale CBDC.
Thank you so much. And with that, I think we will conclude our questions. I greatly appreciate the fullness of your answers and all of the information that you shared with us today. And again, we appreciate your commitment to Colombia and to public service. And thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thank you very, very much. It's an honor to be with you, and I hope we keep a very close relationship with the Atlantic Council, with the FEDESarrollo, and with the Central Bank of Colombia.
Thank you.